So international students studying inside the United States often have a different set of rules that they have to abide by than citizens or residents of the United States. For example, if you're a citizen, you're doing the 1040, but if you're an international student, you're probably doing the 1040 NR. In addition, an international student would also have to file a Form 8843. Now, that 8843 is going to be in addition to your 1040 NR if you had income, but even if you didn't have income, you're still doing that 8843 in most instances. And this is going to be true for students that are on a visa for an F, J, M, or Q. So it's going to apply to those types of situations. Now, for purposes of this video, what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to walk you through the entire process of completing that 8843 so you can see where you enter the information and what type of information is necessary on that form. In addition, I'll talk to you about the substantial presence rules and how many of the students, international students, are going to be exempt, so their dates aren't being included as part of the substantial presence test. So my name is Brian Winterow. I'm a tax attorney and tax professor, and let's go ahead and get started on this process. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the general filing requirements as to whether you're required to do an 8843 and also whether you're required to do a 1040 NR. Now remember, 1040 NR only applies if you made any type of income. So the first thing we're looking at is we have the situations, and on all these you're doing F, J, M, or Qs, although on the second part, now we're looking at the dependents with or without income. The first one, though, we're looking at FJ, M, or Q, student with no U.S. income. So if you don't have any U.S. income, then you're not going to have to do the 1040 NR. The 1040 NR is only if you have U.S. sourced income, which is often things like a 1099, W-2, or even excess scholarship that exceeded your tuition and fees. So if you don't have any income, then the only thing you're going to be filing is that 8843. You won't be filing the 1040 NR. Now, same situation, but we add income. Then what happens is you do your 8843, of course, and you're going to be doing the 1040 NR. This is the same type of thing as we go down and we look at the F2, J2s with dependents, right? If you have income, then yes, you're looking generally at the 1040 NR. If you do not have income, then what you're looking at is just the 8843. So with income, you do 8843 and the 1040 NR. Without income, all you're doing is the 8843. All right, well, let's go take a look at the form 8843, and I've segmented this into the different parts, so that way we're not overwhelmed when we look at it, and we're going to look to see exactly how we're going to enter the information. Now, before I show you that actual form, let me give you the basic fact pattern, so that way as we go through here, we can make sure that we're solving it correctly. We know what numbers we're putting and why we're putting them there when we get to the 8843. All right, well, let's go look at the fact pattern. All right, so here's our fact pattern that's going to relate to our 8843. So I'm going to be using this data to complete the 8843. So our student is going to be Lena Chin, or our client's Lena Chin, and the country of citizenship is going to be China. So Lena is on an F1 student visa and made it to the United States on August 15th, 2023 to attend Florida State University. Now, because she's on an F1 visa, we know right away that she has to file this 8843, or most likely has to file our 8843. So the next question is, does she also have to do a 1040 NR? Well, her income is zero in the tax year, so she's not going to have any type of U.S. sourced income, so she's not going to be responsible for doing the 1040 NR. The other thing we have to look at is, does she have a tax identification number? No, she doesn't have one. But here's the interesting thing when we're looking at this. When you're looking at the 8843, you don't need that. Now, if you were doing an 88, or if you're doing the 1040 NR, you would need to have a taxpayer identification number. So whether it's going to be an I-10 or a social security number, that's necessary, but not for our 8843. So that's an important distinction between the two. Is she a green card application? Nope. And how long has she been in the United States? 2023, 2024, and 2025. That's important because after you hit 5 years, then things kind of change a little bit, because then it starts looking at, okay, well, are you still at the exempt status? But let's go ahead, take this information, and we're going to jump over to our 8843. And like I said, I separated this into parts to make it a little bit more manageable as we go through each of these different components of it. All right, so let's go take a look at the first part of our 8843. All right, so we're now looking at part 1 of our 8843. And before we even get to part 1, I guess I should show you what we're doing to fill it out. So when you're at the top of the 8843, you're seeing your personal information. So it starts out with your name, first name, and then your middle initial. I didn't provide a middle initial here, so we have just Lena, and then we have Chin as the second part of it for the last name. Fill out your address. So I didn't complete the entire address in Beijing. I just was letting you know, okay, Beijing, China. In the U.S., you just put your U.S. address. I just put 123 College Ave. I just made up a U.S. address for this. But you put your U.S. address. Okay, then what we get to is our general information. So part 1. So 1A, it wants to know the type of visa. So I told you on the other one, on the previous slide, that we're on an F1 visa. So Lena came here on an F1 visa. And then it asks, well, what date did she enter the United States? So this is when did she enter the United States? Not when did the semester start, but when did Lena actually enter the United States? So if you're doing a 8843, you're going to put the date that you enter the United States. So here we have April 15th, 2023. Second part, 1B, current immigration status. If it's changed, also enter that. Well, like I said, F1, there was no change, so I just left it at the F1. Part 2, or line 2, of what country or countries were you a citizen during the tax year? So China for Lena. Now, some people may be dual citizens. Now, if you have dual citizenship, you're going to include all the countries that you have, the countries that you have citizenship with. 3A, what country or countries issued you a passport? Same thing with your dual citizenship type of area. Whatever countries you received a passport from, you're going to enter. So if you only have a passport from China, you're just going to put China. Enter your passport number. I just made up a passport number. You put your actual passport number there. Enter the actual number of days you were present in the United States. So we have 340 in 2025, 322 in 2024, and 130 in 2023. So here's the thing. There's actually calculators out there. So if you know when you entered and how long you've been in the U.S., the number of days that you're in the U.S., and maybe that you went back to China or to your home country, or you just left for a while, look, you're going to be able to use those calculators here to be able to calculate those numbers. So that's what I would suggest, is just using one of the calculators to help you get those numbers in to make sure that you have it right. That's the process that you would be using. But that part, that 4A, is telling you the number of days you were there. Now, the reason that matters is because they're trying to get to the substantial presence test. And you can see that on 4B. Enter the number of days in 2025 you claim you can exclude for purposes of the substantial presence test. Now, what I did here, and I have the 360, they're excluded, right? They're excluded completely on this because they are on that F1 visa, so they're not counting those days toward the substantial presence test. So that's why it's excluded. So what happens is the substantial presence test, if you've been in the U.S. Within a specific period of time, then you can become a tax resident. That's immigration. That's different than your immigration status. So remember, in the previous video, I talked about the U.S. taxes, worldwide income. So once you start hitting that, your income position changes. Well, as a student, you're exempt from it, so we're putting the exempt portion of it there. All right, well, let's go ahead and look at part 2 for teachers and trainees. We're going to go quickly through that because in our example, we don't have that. Most students aren't going to have it. So we'll just look at it real quick so you can see what's there, and then we'll continue to move on. So this is what part 2 would look like. But for international students, this generally isn't something that you're ever going to have to fill out. So I'm skipping over part 2 because this is for teachers and trainees. But I did want you to at least have it for inclusion so you could see what it is that you wouldn't be filling out. And then at the bottom of this, you see part 3, students. Well, if you're here on a student visa like an F1, then you know that's the part you're going to next. So let's skip part 2 just like you would in practice, and let's jump over to part 3 for students. All right, so we're now looking at part 3. This is a portion for the students, right? So the first part we have to fill out is going to be line number 9. Enter the name, address, or telephone number of the academic institution you attend. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to enter our university. Like I said, I just selected Florida State University, created an address, created a phone number, but you would put your actual university and phone number, all that information in number 9. Then in number 10, it wants to know, enter the name, address, and telephone number of the director of the academics or other specialized program you participated in during 2025. So oftentimes there's a designated person that you're going to be entering. So you're going to enter that information. You can usually find that through International Student Affairs. Otherwise, you're using the basic information from the university, right? You're going to be using there's general information, the general phone number, that type of thing. But you would want a school official so they know who to contact inside that. And like I said, it's usually pretty easy to access. You can either find it online or you're going to be able to find it just by going to the International Student Affairs to be able to get that information. Number 11, line 11, what we're looking at is they want to know what was your visa type. So F, J, M, or Q, that's what we've been talking about throughout this process. So in 2023, we put F, and in 2024, we put F. It's not asking F1, F2, anything like that. We're just putting F for both of those. We didn't have anything in those first lines because the date of entry into the United States was not until 2023. So that's why we did not have any information, any additional information on the previous years in line 11. Line number 12, it wants to know, were you exempt as a teacher, trainee, or student for any part of more than 5 calendar years? All right, this is getting to that substantial presence test. So generally you're exempt for 5 years on the visas for the F, J, M, and Q. So here we've only been in the United States for a couple years. We're putting no on this one. In line number 13, during 2025, did you apply for or take other steps in order to be at lawful permanent resident status? And in this situation, that wasn't applicable, so I put no. And then in line 14, you would have had to explain those steps that you took that you were referring to in line 13. So since we put no in line 13, we can skip line number 14. All right, well, let's go ahead and we're going to quickly look at part number 4, which most students aren't going to ever have to complete. This is going to be for professional athletes type of situations. Okay, so what I did is I decided to include parts 4 and part 5 in this walkthrough because, like I said, for part 4, you're looking at professional athletes, and since we're doing this from a student perspective, that's generally not going to be applicable, so I'm skipping part 4 for us. That's what you would do as well unless you're a professional athlete. Then you get to part 5, individuals with a medical condition or medical problem. So you can see in line 17A, it says describe the medical conditions or medical problems that prevented you from leaving the United States. So that's where you'd put it if you had some type of medical problem that prevented that, and you'd have to have a physician statement that states, yes, that they have actually assessed you and there is that medical problem. So that's what you would complete if you had that medical problem. As a student on a visa, you're generally exempt. So I'm not even worried about the part 5 for this walkthrough. That only leaves us the signature portion of it, so let's take a look at the signature. So now all we have here is our signature. You can see the signature and the date that you completed the form. But let's talk about something else. You have to file this now. So when is the filing date due? Well, it depends on whether you have income or not. If you had U.S. sourced income and you're required to do the 1040 NR, then remember that has to be completed by April 15th. So you would also complete your 8843. You would attach it to your 1040 NR, get it done by April 15th. Now, if you don't have any income, then it's no longer going to be the 1040 NR, so your date to have this filed by is going to be June 15th. So you have a couple extra months that you're going to have to be able to get this filed. Now, one other thing I want to mention to you is when we were talking about the 1040 NR just a moment ago, remember, you would need a taxpayer identification number for that. So it's either going to be your I-10 or your Social Security number in order to complete the 1040 NR, though you don't need it if you're just doing the 8843. Hey, if this video has been helpful, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, and I will go ahead and get another walkthrough done of your 1040 NR. All right, thank you for watching.